Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, we are just over a week into the presidency of second term of Donald Trump. And as you've noticed, there's been a lot of executive orders passed in these opening days. And as you've seen, there's a lot of varying opinions about them. There's also a lot of discussion of their legality. How many of these will hold up in court? Will these be beneficial or hurt the country? Legal Eagle just put out a video. It's called Trump's First Executive Orders Are a Mess. Now, we know Legal Eagle is not a fan of Mr. Trump. That has been very clear for a long time. But let's see their perspective. And let me know what you think down below. As always, the original video is going to be linked down below. All right, let's get started. All right, executive orders are nothing new. A lot of presidents will come in and often use the framing of like the first 100 days in office. And for something to be able to get passed and enacted within 100 days, that can often require executive actions, which, depending on the thing that is trying to be acted upon, is a power that the president has. But as we know, we have checks and balances that can deem some things unconstitutional. And I think we're going to see a bunch of challenges here pretty quickly. In fact, a lot of them have already happened. One specifically is some of the immigration-related executive orders. All right, but let's see what they're going to talk about.
Everyone is breathlessly reporting on President Trump's flurry of executive orders from his first day in office. Birthright citizenship, trans rights, TikTok, you name it. But few sources are digging into whether Trump can actually do any of the things that he's trying to do by executive order.
Oh, I already forgot about the TikTok thing. That one's been interesting because President Trump has had criticisms of TikTok, you know, the whole being owned by China kind of thing in years past. But one of his first actions was to go against basically the ban that the Supreme Court was unanimous on, and at least for temporarily put it back on the market. So that one was an interesting one. But there have been so many executive actions, I'm already forgetting some of them. Go.
So I guess we're going to do it. Now, executive orders are official documents through which the President of the United States manages the operations of the federal government. Right. The Constitution does not directly address executive orders, and no federal statute explicitly authorizes them. Yeah. However, they are accepted as part of a president's inherent powers regarding the executive branch.
Because there are some gray areas or things that just aren't addressed, say, in our Constitution, and you can kind of fill in those gaps, I guess, and then we kind of deal with them as they come along.
A president can issue executive orders to direct the executive branch, enforce existing laws, or manage national emergencies, provided the president acts within their constitutional or statutory authority.
Right.
Executive orders do not need congressional approval and cannot be directly overturned by.
Yeah, one you see quite a bit is national emergencies, so like a hurricane, earthquake, stuff like that. Things that need immediate responses.
Lawmakers. But an executive orders do not need congressional approval and cannot be directly overturned by lawmakers. But an executive order cannot contradict congressionally passed laws or contradict the Constitution. Executive orders have become more common over time, in part because congressional gridlock has made passing laws more difficult. Traditionally, the party that is not in the White House complains about the abuse of executive orders, and then once they get into the White House, they do even more via executive order than the previous administration.
That is true. It's pretty bipartisan in the United States to accuse the other of abusing power. I just feel like that happens all the time.
But actions taken pursuant to these orders are subject to judicial oversight. And you can bet that many of Trump's orders will be contested in court, just like they were during his first term.
The immigration one has come through on challenges that some of, I guess, the wording or some of what might be carried out with immigration laws is in contrast to the 14th Amendment about citizenship rights, specifically birth rights. So it's generally been understood and carried out that somebody born in the United States, regardless of their parent status, is going to be considered a citizen of the United States and be able to become a citizen. And that has right now been challenged by, it looks like, by the Trump administration, but the courts are already trying to push back against that. So that is one of the first ones we're going to see go to court.
Let's dig into these executive orders.
Okay.
In one, Trump declared a national emergency on the U.S.-Mexico border. In another order, Trump declared, quote, the current situation at the southern border qualifies as an invasion. The order suspends, quote, the physical entry of aliens involved in an invasion into the United States across the southern border until I determine that the invasion has concluded. Now, can the president do this? Well, the Immigration and Nationality Act outlines the legal framework for individuals.
That is interesting because there aren't, you'd have to have parameters of what I guess an invasion is, but then also have to deal with that and see if that is in orders. Now, things like declarations of war, that is a power of the legislative branch. But with this, is this going to be, again, seen as like a state of emergency as far as like warfare, or one that you would that you would try to put in the kind of umbrella of like disasters, again, like an earthquake or something like that.
Individuals who seek protection in the U.S. and do this. Well, the Immigration and Nationality Act outlines the legal framework for individuals who seek protection in the U.S. because they fear persecution in their home country. And the president might not be permitted to suspend physical entry of asylum seekers into the United States, and he may not be authorized to stop asylum seekers who are already in the United States from getting a hearing. Section 212F of the INA allows the president to restrict or suspend entry of non-citizens or groups of non-citizens into the United States if their entry is determined to be detrimental to the interests of the United States.
The asylum thing is something that will have to be addressed if they're talking about this immigration stuff, because being an official asylum seeker is something that is protected. Now, it's still seen as something that's going to be temporary. And what happens is you end up, if you're an asylum seeker, you go in front of a judge, you got to provide evidence of the, asylum that you're seeking, where are you coming from, why you're leaving there, and try to provide evidence. Then there's a debate within that, though, about what can qualify as something worthy of successfully getting asylum. Is it just the country I come from is poor and you're looking for like economic opportunities, or again something more extreme like fearful of violence or something like that? A government regime, or it's rampant by violent regimes of any kind. So that is an argument that will probably have to be talked about more here coming up within this whole conversation about immigrants and their status.
Trump has dubiously asserted that immigrants are passing through countries with communicable diseases, and that one reason they are detrimental is to the health and national security of Americans, but this determination might have exceeded his authority. To deal with this alleged invasion, Trump asked the Secretary of State to designate specific international groups, including Tren de Aragua and MS-13, as foreign terrorist organizations. It says, quote, "Within 14 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of State shall take all appropriate action in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence to make a recommendation regarding the designation of any cartel."
Now, from what I understand, if something is able to be with that tag of like a terrorist organization, it allows the government to do certain things a little bit more involved than it would otherwise.
Can he do that? Probably. The authority to designate a group as a foreign terrorist organization is delegated to the Secretary of State by the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. So the president may direct the Secretary of State to review certain groups for potential designation, but the formal authority lies with the secretary. Trump also announced plans to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
Well, one thing we know, I think, with President Trump in this term is probably appointing people. You can see there's a lot of new appointees, not bringing back a lot of the people from the first term, is getting people in this term that he feels are going to carry out his wishes. The things to get this job, it's like you got to be on the same page with what he wants. So we'll see if there's actually going to be as much of heads clashing in the executive branch or anybody that works close to Trump, because you did see some of that in the first term.
To take action against these groups, but that act only applies to people who are nationals of countries the U.S. is at war with or where there is a declared hostility. Trump ordered the government to halt the admission of refugees and cites situations in places like Springfield, Ohio, and Charleroi, Wisconsin, where large numbers of refugees settled. You might recall some of the complete fabricated lies about immigrants eating pets. Trump says his authority to suspend the U.S. refugee admissions program stems from his Section 212F powers. But Trump ordered the Secretary of State and others to designate cartels and gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. And he ostensibly gave the military more power to, quote, protect the territorial integrity of the United States.
And if somebody is probably in the United States and there's evidence of that being part of these organizations that now get framed as terrorist organizations, I'm assuming a lot of the protocols to be able to deport them or, do whatever, it probably gets streamlined.
Seal the borders. Trump directed the Attorney General to seek the death penalty for capital crimes committed by immigrants without legal status. And in another order, Trump rescinded former President Biden's administrative executive orders and ordered the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to, quote, evaluate and undertake any lawful actions to ensure that so-called sanctuary jurisdictions are ineffective. He also ordered the director of OMB to deny public benefits to illegal aliens who are not eligible for it. And the president is certainly within his authority to rescind former President Biden's orders and take lawful actions to limit the authority of sanctuary cities and states within the law. Trump also signed an order resuming building of the wall, suspending the CNHV parole program, which enabled Haitians, Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans to settle temporarily in the United States. And the government must also stop allowing non-citizens in Mexico to make appointments to present asylum claims.
Those countries there, Haiti's a little bit of an outlier. We know the United States is very involved in Haiti, but something like Cuba and Venezuela, which kind of get labeled and kind of interpreted as enemy nations or the opposite of what American cultural and economic values are, that you have people fleeing, socialism or communism, however you want to frame those countries. But then it's like those people are freeing those situations, but then wanting to send them back. Because I've heard people say like Cubans or Venezuelans, like those are the type of immigrants that come back, or that should be able to come like to the United States because it's like evidence that they're fleeing a situation that seems dialogically opposed to the United States. But then also they talk about like the Tren de Agua cartel group, was Venezuelan. So you also have to deal with that. So it's like, will this be used in any kind of political move? Probably not. It does seem like it doesn't really matter where they're going to come from. They're not going to be used as these political pawns again to try to prove a point that Cuba and Venezuela systems are bad.
Some of these new restrictions are probably within the president's powers, but it's hard to say how each of these will play out. The language in the executive order is not specific enough to tell us exactly what Trump will do and how he will do it, and it's likely that he will continue to sign new orders in this area, which will give us more clarity on what he can and cannot do.
One thing that will have to be talked about too is logistically what parts or which executive orders can actually happen. Can you actually deport these people or do these certain things? What is actually like physically possible? So these are getting signed without really having to need to demonstrate that these things can actually be carried out.
And the ACLU has already filed suit over the refugee policies. As predicted,
Definitely
Trump has attacked birthright citizenship. As Liz Dye explained in our previous video, birthright citizenship is a cornerstone of constitutional law and has been reaffirmed in legal decisions for 150 years.
This is what I was talking about earlier. If you're born in the United States, you automatically qualify for citizenship status, which people have, say, some people claim that's unconstitutional. Okay, under 14th Amendment, which was originally in the context of freeing of slaves. So 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, those are the, Reconstruction, end of slavery, and integrating former slaves into American society and into American politics. And that was part of it.
Trump's order ostensibly declares that a child born in the United States is not a citizen if at the time of birth, their mother is either unlawfully present in the United States or their mother's presence in the United States was lawful but temporary. And their father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. It applies to children born after 30 days from the date of the order, and the order is broader than expected.
I don't know enough about the background of what type, what can they actually cite in this executive order? What laws can they refer to that, again, does not automatically qualify? Again, people born in the United States for citizenship. I don't know. If you know what the argument is going to be, so be it. But it would very much be against precedent that we've seen ever since the 14th Amendment was passed in the 1800s.
Ostensibly covering children born after 30 days from the date of the order. And the order is broader than expected, ostensibly covering children of undocumented immigrants and also those born to foreign nationals who are legally in the country on visas. Now, the interpretation of the 14th Amendment on which this executive order relies is not reflected in current law or legal precedent, and therefore it's very likely the courts will strike it down. As we've covered in other videos, the 14th Amendment says that birthright citizenship applies unless you are not bound by the laws of the United States. And I think even the Trump administration wants immigrants and tourists to be bound by the laws of the United States when they are in this country. Or he just created the purge.
Because there are a lot of people that are now in what would be considered legal status that are people that overstayed visas, whether it's work visa, student visa, travel visa. That is one of the ways that people have come into the country and then stayed.
I don't know. Maybe that's what he wants when they are in this country. Or he just created the purge. I don't know. Maybe that's what he wants to. And lawyers are not going to give up on bedrock constitutional rights without a fight. And the ACLU and at least 18 states have filed lawsuits to enjoin this order. Then there's TikTok. We've finally seen the TikTok order, and it raises more questions than answers. The order instructs the Attorney General not to take any action.
Before he gets into this, it seems like people don't know what to do. The government officials, like, people don't know what to do about TikTok. It's like once, we know Trump's tune kind of changed a little bit, especially in this latter election where TikTok was actually a very powerful campaigning tool for Trump, and maybe that was part of the reason he's kind of switching, about it. But then again, he's also this very hard anti-China hardliner when it comes to perceived infiltration of intelligence or anything from China into the United States. It seems like even he's kind of conflicted with it. Again, we saw the Supreme Court was, it didn't seem to be an issue for them to say that you can in fact ban it, or at least force them to have ownership in the United States and have to break that apart. But that's an interesting one, because from what I understand, and he'll get into it, I think, isn't it temporary, technically speaking, the TikTok like reinstatement?
Law for 75 days. And this extension is meant to give ByteDance TikTok not to take any action under the law for 75 days.
75
And this
days,
extension is meant to give ByteDance TikTok's Chinese parent company additional time to negotiate a sale of its U.S. assets.
Right.
The order directs the Department of Justice to promise
then
app
what would
stores the
happen
government
if it
won't
doesn't
fine
go
them
through?
if they offer TikTok to new users. Quote, during this period, the Department of Justice shall take no action to enforce the act or impose any penalties against any entity for any non-compliance with the act. But
Now, not a lot of you a lot of people have talked about how a banning of TikTok is actually motivated by the business interests of, say, like Google and Meta, because what would likely happen is popular TikTok accounts and people that do TikTok for business and things like that will then migrate over to, Instagram or to YouTube to make their content over there, because they, short formats like TikTok. So some people think it's like a secret operation for these like business owners.
as we talked about last week, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the TikTok ban statute. And the act says that the president may extend the ban deadline by 90 days, but only if a sale is in progress. ByteDance has insisted it will not sell TikTok, and no sale is in progress. And an executive order does not
then what'll
suspend a statute that was passed by Congress.
Right.
Republican Senators Tom Cotton and Pete Ricketts insisted, quote, there is no legal basis for any kind of extension of its effective date. And Senator Cotton said, quote, nothing in the order changes the legal scheme, and the companies, quote, face hundreds of billions of dollars of ruinous liability under the law. The AG may follow Trump's directive, but nothing in the order prevents future administrations from fining companies who violated the law. And of note, Apple has still not made the app available for download by new users. And when he signed the order, Trump made a lot of wild statements.
I thought it was. Is that like different formats? Is that from providers that don't use Apple?
TikTok, an app he once tried to ban. And as we discussed in the
that would also be weird, because like if Google operated devices allowed TikTok, that's literally a direct competitor.
Wild statements about TikTok, an app he once tried to ban. And as we discussed in the video about the situation, the US government has serious concerns about TikTok's data collection practices. But Trump said that now he's seen TikTok, it's not that big of a deal. Quote, because I got to use it, and remember, TikTok is largely about kids, young kids. If China is going to get information about young kids out of it, to be honest, I think we have bigger problems than that. So great, the president doesn't care about those data issues now that he's cozied up to the CEO of TikTok. And now he just won't enforce the law. Now, we've expressed some skepticism about the legal basis for the
But again, it's like he's getting tighter with like Mark Zuckerberg. You wonder how that's going to play, or how much Zuckerberg is actually in his ear or trying to potentially push for a TikTok ban, because obviously it would help Meta and his ownership.
TikTok ban. But at the same time, the precedent of just not enforcing a law that the Supreme Court says is valid is also super, super bad. But elsewhere, Trump signed an executive order establishing the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and appointing Elon Musk as its leader. The order does not create a new department. Instead, it rebrands the U.S. Digital Service as the United States DOGE Service. Now, I know we have bigger fish to fry, but this to me might be the most offensive thing that happened on a grammatical level, shoving an acronym inside of an acronym. So yeah, I guess we all have to live with the United States Department of Government Efficiency Service.
How much of that was from Elon? Like Elon has been doing the Doge meme like 10 years after it stopped being a meme. Like he is so invested. He still posts Doge memes that he ended like 10 years ago. I'm assuming that was very influential that he could have the acronym for an agency that he is going to be a part of.
Wonderful. The order directs each federal agency to establish a DOGE team comprising of at least 4 members, including a team leader, an engineer, a human resources specialist, and an attorney. These teams are required to implement DOGE's initiatives within their respective agencies. Now, to your burning question, does Trump have the authority to establish DOGE? Yeah, probably. Creating an entirely new federal department typically requires legislative action by Congress. However, the president can issue executive orders reorganizing or renaming existing agencies. In this instance, DOGE was formed by rebranding a pre-existing U.S. digital service. Though that might cause more problems than it solves, given that it completely changes the mission of the existing service. Now, obviously, if you're issuing hundreds of dubious executive orders, you'll want a good lawyer.
What'll be interesting, though, is if, this DOGE if nobody opposes it, what power will they actually have? Okay, because they're just rebranding digital services. So like, I don't know exactly what kind of authority they have with that.
A great lawyer,
you know?
let my law firm, the Eagle Team, help. If you've gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you've got a data breach letter saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. Because it's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free call.
This is a dumb question, but I've seen this ad so many times with this. Is that him also? I forget his name. The guy, the Jim Halpert looking guy. Is that also? I feel like he's changed a lot. At least his hair is like, I don't know, less poofy. Or like, is it his brother?
Consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal
Stone,
team.
Dylan,
you need a legal
Stone.
team. Then there's criminal law. Trump signed a new executive order pushing the Department of Justice to expand its use of the federal death penalty. Under Biden, there was a moratorium on the federal death penalty, and under the new order, the DOJ must seek death as a punishment in all applicable federal cases and to help states get sufficient supplies for lethal injection drugs for executions.
That's one of those things that has come down to the states. Some states don't do death penalties, some do. Something that kind of is part of that gray area wiggle room that is allowed in the 9th and 10th Amendments, specifically the 10th Amendment in this case, which basically says if the Constitution doesn't say it, it's going to be a state thing.
Trump also directs the Attorney General to, quote, seek the overruling of Supreme Court precedents that limit the authority of state and federal governments to impose capital punishment. This order could be referring to a number of Supreme Court decisions which limited application of the death penalty. The court has prohibited the death penalty for crimes where the victim did not die and eliminates the death penalty for juveniles and limits execution of offenders with disabilities. And in answer to your question, why, yes, it does seem like an administration preparing to kill as many people as possible. Now, during Trump's first term, he ended a 17-year hiatus on the use of the federal death penalty, and Trump's administration carried out 13 executions during his last months in office. However, these requests generally fall within the president's power to influence how the DOJ allocates resources and develops legal strategies. President Trump also wants the AG to determine whether these offenders can be charged with state capital crimes, and it's fine for the president to order a book report about whether they can be tried again in state court, but
one of the major things that people have used as arguments against the death penalty is the fact that the unsure nature that a lot of people will have about convictions, that you could end up executing somebody that ends up being innocent. That's also why you see appeals go for long and somebody can be on death row for years and years and years. But that has been an argument. So there's been that argument about, again, wrongful convictions. But then also I know that a lot of people put like the moral argument about it. And so there's different arguments that you've heard about that.
That's as far as the order goes. The president can't direct state prosecutions to charge his offenders with state crimes simply because he thinks they should get the death penalty. Trump has also withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. Although the agreement
that happened in the first term and then, get back into it, now out of it again,
was signed by the United States, the Senate never ratified it as a treaty. This distinction allows the president to unilaterally withdraw the U.S. from the agreement without requiring congressional approval. America joined the WHO through a joint resolution passed by Congress in 1948,
That's another one trying to get
which
rid
included
of
a stipulation
World Health
for withdrawal
Organization.
upon providing 1 year's notice. In 2020, President Trump initiated a withdrawal from the WHO. President Biden halted that in 2021, and there's no legal problem with Trump withdrawing from the WHO as long as he follows the notice requirements. President Trump signed orders to rename the Gulf of Mexico.
Give notice about them leaving. Now, there's been a lot of arguments you've heard about why get out of these organizations. You didn't hear the one with World Health Organization in the first term, but it's largely been response and a criticism of World Health Organization when it comes to like COVID. And that's been the thing that it looks like is really emphasized by Trump then. But the Paris Climate Accords, that was something, again, he did earlier. And his big, thing he was talked about, at least for then, was that the United States should be able to dictate their own environmental policies. So whatever you think about that. All right, renaming geographical landmarks. All right, so Mount McKinley is apparently back from Denali, and then Gulf of America
to the Gulf of America and revert Alaska's Mount Denali to its former name, Mount McKinley. Can he do this? No and yes. The president's executive order directs federal agencies to use the new designation Gulf of America in official U.S. documents and communications. However, the change applies solely within the United States and does not have international jurisdiction.
So a little bit of history with the Gulf of Mexico idea. That was named by the Spanish when basically the Spanish under this term of what Mexico was to them at that time, pretty much was in control of pretty much the whole Gulf. So like from Florida, ringing around much of like the southern United States, and of course in today like modern Mexico, and then towards the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. So back then it was kind of controlled by, you know, Mexico, or at least was named after that because of what the territory looked like back then. With the Mount McKinley thing, this seems to be motivated by President Trump has on numerous times shared his admiration for President McKinley. McKinley was kind of like a big business guy. He also was heavily funded. If you know about him, kind of, and like President Roosevelt, they kind of went at it. Although, you know, Roosevelt ends up being his vice president and becomes the president because McKinley ended up being shot. But that was, he was a very like big, again, like pro-business and an era of kind of the robber barons and stuff like that. So I know a lot of people feel like he almost feels like he can relate to McKinley. But there's been a lot of criticisms of McKinley that was one of the biggest donation campaigns in like history, when that he was a major recipient of massive amounts of donations from, again, some of the wealthiest industrialists we've ever had in the planet. So it kind of seems that, you know, that kind of makes sense with kind of, you know, how they view business and businessmen and how that integrates with the country and with the government. He's a fan.
The International Hydrographic Organization, which standardizes maritime nomenclature worldwide, doesn't have to change the name. Therefore, the other nations can still call it the Gulf of Mexico. In the United States, the naming of geographical features is primarily managed by the Board on Geographic Names, the BGN, established to maintain uniformity in place names across federal agencies. And in 2015, President Obama
did hear, by the way, just today here, that Google, for Google Maps, is in the process of changing it to Gulf of America. They're in that process.
Sure,
they got to update their database.
Jewell used her authority to change the name of Mount McKinley to Denali, which native Alaskans have called it for thousands of years. So Trump can legally change that name. The president has the authority to order or suggest the secretary change the place names. In changing the name back, Trump followed the same procedure that Obama used to change the name to Denali. And Trump also signed an executive order standardizing national architecture style.
From what I've heard too, even when it did get changed to McKinley, from what I've heard from people saying, at least they're speaking for Alaskans, that it was still locally called Denali, like this whole time.
The order mandates that new federal bills signed an executive order standardizing national architecture styles. The order mandates that new federal buildings like courthouses and agency headquarters adhere to classical architectural styles such as Greek and Roman. Trump asserts that these styles are sturdy and useful. The order criticizes modernist styles, particularly brutalism and deconstructivism, as failing to embody American ideals. So I guess in terms of what's more important than—
Except their Roman and Greek ideas. They took it for them. And we know a lot of influence of those systems, of foundations of democracy, republics, etc. Those are Greek and Roman things, you know?
Your children's data being—
It's like, I don't know, should we try to develop our own unique system that represents our like judicial system and government values? I don't know. What would that look like? I don't know. I mean, the Greek and Roman stuff is cool. I mean, it is stylistic and it's architecturally very sound. To have columns and domes and stuff like that. There's a reason it has been popular just from an architectural standpoint. And, you know, and they bring it back in the Renaissance too. Although a lot of that was about, you know, the cultural aspects of Roman Greece.
Embody American ideals. So I guess in terms of what's more important than your children's data being expatriated to China, President Trump meant defining what future buildings are going to look like on the outside. The order directs the GSA to update architectural guidelines within 90 days to prioritize classical styles. Now, near the end of Trump's first term, he issued an executive order establishing a new classification for federal civil servants known as Schedule F. Schedule F was never implemented, and President Biden repealed it shortly after taking office. President Trump has now reinstated the Schedule F classification. Now, generally, career civil servants are shielded from political interference so they can carry out their responsibilities without political pressure. But Trump's order says all federal employees are, quote, required to faithfully implement administration policies to the best of their ability, consistent with their constitutional oath, and the vesting of executive authority solely in the president. The National Treasury—
So the fear I know for this one is that essentially going to mean you need to carry out the president's will. If not, will this be used as a way to try to remove somebody from office? Maybe it's in a roundabout way, but I know that's a criticism of this action.
Employees Union filed a lawsuit which argues that the president does not have the authority to reclassify federal workers as at-will employees. And we'll certainly talk more about this as the case moves through the courts. If you want to get into the weeds on this, check out the video that we did on Project 2025. Oh, and by the way, all of this is basically straight out of Project 2025. But Trump also ordered federal employees to return to the office full time and ordered a hiring freeze for all positions except for the military, immigration, and other law enforcement jobs. And these orders are probably within his powers as the leader of the executive branch. And turning now to Trump's new political staff, Trump signed a memorandum giving his new hires interim security clearances without background checks. This allows them to have temporary access to classified information. Can he do that? Yeah, probably, even to Tulsi Gabbard. The president possessed.
So people that haven't had this type of clearance, they can basically jump in front of the line, I guess, or become exempt from that for his appointees that he trusts will be kind of loyal to his platform and his things he's advocating for.
Possesses broad authority over the classification and declassification of information, as well as the granting of security clearances. The authority is derived from the president's constitutional role as commander-in-chief and has been affirmed through legal precedents. Trump signed executive orders aimed at dismantling federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. These orders directed federal agencies to terminate DEI
this has taken action already.
60 days, place DEI staff on paid leave with plans for eventual layoffs, and review employment practices to ensure they exclude DEI considerations. Is this within the president's powers? Yeah, probably as the head of the executive branch, except to the extent that it's already codified in statute. The president has the authority to issue executive orders to manage federal operations.
So in the federal scheme, the DEI initiatives that have existed, and again, the federal government.
This includes directing how federal agencies implement policies and manage programs. President Biden issued orders to promote the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion during his tenure, and Trump can revoke those. However, if these initiatives conflict with federal civil rights laws like Title VII, then it would be problematic.
Right.
For example, in his executive order ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity, the Trump administration rescinds Executive Order 11246, which President Lyndon Johnson signed in 1965.
I can't imagine this isn't going to be held up in court, or at least responded to in the court system.
This order desegregated federal contracting. And President Trump also signed several executive orders impacting transgender rights. The first order mandates that all federal agencies recognize only two immutable genders, male and female, on official documents, including U.S. passports.
What has been the standard recently? Just like not applicable, if you have to choose male or female on these documents. What is the current thing? I actually don't even know. Does that same to go with like driver's licenses?
The order conflicts with the American Medical Association's guidance, which states that gender identity exists on a spectrum rather than as an immutable male-female binary. Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's 2017 Muslim ban, seems to have written the order. He tried to define the words male and female. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Quote, male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell.
And we know this is going to bring in the argument about like sex versus gender. I don't know if that's where things are going to get held up. And I don't know what institutions, again, can designate that sort of thing. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with this one.
I've suggested that Miller used AI to draft part of this order because it's so friggin' dumb. And maybe that's why the order uses strange phrasing. We're assuming here that large reproductive cell is an egg or an ovum, and the small reproductive cell is the sperm. But these definitions assume that from the moment of conception, humans are male or female. But as every doctor knows, at conception, humans do not yet produce gametes, which are what determines the sex characteristics. So congratulations, everyone. There's only two genders, and everyone is neuter neither of the two genders. And in some ways, it is morbidly hilarious that given the task of...
I don't know that the wording was going to be in there, because of the how that all works, XY chromosomes and that kind of thing. Interesting wording. People really thought it was like an AI. Like, is anybody trying to replicate that? If you try to send that to ChatGPT and it actually comes back with that type of definition, anyone tried that?
Determining what is a woman, the Trump administration has no friggin' clue. But President Trump's order prevents people from changing the sex designation on U.S. passports. The order does not impact state laws, and the president cannot unilaterally change state laws that allow transgender people to update their names and gender markers on their driver's licenses. But generally, can he do the rest of this? Probably. Under Federal Law 22 U.S.C. 211A, it grants the Secretary of State the authority to issue passports under rules prescribed by the president or secretary. However, these orders must not conflict with existing laws for constitutional rights.
This is one he'll probably
and
win.
People will challenge this order
if it goes to challenge.
And of course, this is an area of the law that is rapidly changing.
Now, we all know with so many of these things, it can completely get reverted with the next, presidential administration. Basically, anything that can be done with an executive order can basically be repealed by executive order. And assuredly, if depending on what the trend's going to be, if, somebody gets elected in 2028 that kind of follows Trump's ideas and supports these things, so be it, probably continue on. But if it goes to like a different political party, like the Democratic Party, then, a lot of the stuff may just flip back immediately. This is why people say term limits are important and that kind of thing, so that nothing really kind of lasts forever, I guess, in American politics.
2020, the Supreme Court ruled in Bostick versus Clayton County that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination based on sex, also prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. At least at the moment, this decision would trump the president's new executive orders. However, Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh have already said they'd like to overrule Bostock. Trump also revoked Biden's order allowing transgender people to serve openly in the military. And can he reinstate that ban? Well, maybe. The Supreme Court allowed Trump's ban to take effect in 2019, but they did not issue an opinion on the merits. Can the president ban medical treatments and procedures? Probably not. The president doesn't have the direct authority to compel a state to alter its healthcare practices. However, he can incentivize policy changes by attaching conditions to federal funding. Later this year, the Supreme Court will decide whether states can ban gender treatment for minors.
Is it going to end up in some compromise or something like it used to be with gay people in the military, where it became this like don't ask, don't tell kind of thing? You're not going to ask, so don't really talk about it. Could it end up being that sort of thing? But again, we could, all this stuff could be reversed. All right, what's chapter 10 here?
President Trump also signed an order requiring the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence to investigate potential free speech infringements that may have occurred during the Biden administration. This order covers actions the Biden administration took in several areas, including the January 6th prosecutions, FBI investigations into threats against teachers, and collaboration with social media companies. Upon completing these inquiries, the Attorney General and Director of National Intelligence will make recommendations for future action. This order probably falls within the president's powers, but we don't know if it will end up being a nothing burger or a pretext to purge disloyal employees. The nominees for Attorney General and DNI, Pam Bondi and Tulsi Gabbard, could use it to create a list of employees who should be fired, going above and beyond Schedule F. Then there is the environment. In Trump's inauguration speech, he said, quote, "We will drill, baby, drill." And he then issued a flurry of orders that were gifts to fossil fuel companies. The first was a declaration of national energy emergency. Quote, "The United States' insufficient energy production, transportation, refining, and generation constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to our nation's economy, national security, and foreign policy." The order defines the term.
Essentially where he's saying we're too reliant on those kind of foreign energy resources, that it's part of national security.
Energy or energy resources as crude oil, natural gas, least condensates, natural gas liquids, refined petroleum products, uranium, coal, biofuels, geothermal heat, the kinetic movement of flowing water, and critical minerals. And this definition somehow leaves out the fastest growing sector of energy resources, the renewable energy sources like wind and solar. Trump used the national emergency declaration to take additional actions, like he instructed the energy secretary to resume reviewing applications for liquefied natural gas export projects.
So it doesn't seem like, he's going to push for government intervention. I don't know if that's going to result in like subsidies or something like that for fossil fuels. Whereas you see, again, other countries like China is becoming kind of the biggest producer now for solar, because that does have, government support and subsidies with that. So it looks like he's not really maybe interested in sort of trying to compete with these other energy sources, again, like solar. We know he's not a big fan of wind. He talked about not only that it's not supposed to be as efficient, but the whole like they hurt the birds and stuff like that. Like birds fly into the windmills and then they die. But yeah, it looks like not going to do a lot of investment. That's where it'll be interesting to see if the United States is just going to get left behind. And as these other energy resources become more sought after across the world, the United States will not be on that edge of being a major provider for this of the world, whereas somewhere like China could be.
He rescinded a 2021 Biden executive order that aimed for 50% of U.S. vehicle sales to be electric by 2030, and he outlawed offshore windmills. Does Trump have the authority to invoke a national energy emergency? Probably, because the president's ability to declare an emergency is very broad. Congress granted the president access to 137 statutory powers upon declaring a national emergency. And these powers encompass actions such as seizing property, organizing and controlling the means of production, and deploying military forces domestically. During his first term, Trump invoked a national emergency at the border and used it to
Wall.
justify building the wall. Many commentators have pointed out that the president's powers in this area are potentially so vast that they could easily be exploited by a power-hungry president. Boy, that would be really terrible, wouldn't it? Now, the eyes of the world are fixed on what Donald Trump is going to do next. He broke the record for signing the most day one executive orders in U.S. history, which in turn compelled most news outlets to write headlines that speak to the set of executive orders as a whole rather than any one in particular. Yes, this is going to be the Mr. Burns effect presidency.
As you remember, I prefaced, watching these videos, and I've watched quite a few Legal Eagle videos. It's basically the most popular kind of law channel, I guess, especially with kind of looking at current events through the scope of the judicial system and just courts and laws. But we know they very much are not ones that will hide from, being very critical, right? You've seen consistent criticism of President Trump and kind of his policies and that kind of thing. So I think we have all come to understand that. But nevertheless, looking at kind of the evidence, you actually saw with him really kind of say that it seems like a lot of these executive actions seems like can be carried out. I mean, it didn't seem like too many of them he was out there saying like it's going to be shut down. Like he would say, in some of them it would be challenged, but at least, he is saying that it looks like a lot of these things could potentially go through just because there may not be precedent, or it's working again with gray areas about what a president can or can't do. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that right now. So we'll see as we continue on. Again, we're only like 8 days into a Trump presidency. We'll see what the effect of these are and how of these executive orders and how they affect the country. And, we'll try to track that here on our channel and keep trying to look at the stuff through that historical context. That's, of course, what we do here. All right. With that, y'all, we'll see you next time.